Hello, Scottish Pagan Federation Conference. My name is Lindsay River, and I'm very pleased to be here recording this talk during these strange times of lockdown. Some of you may know me from talks and workshops I've done in the past, or from the book The Knot of Time that I wrote with Sally Gillespie over 30 years ago. This book was about astrology from a goddess and feminist perspective. While I was researching the origins of astrology in ancient Mesopotamia, I had a vivid meeting with the passionate and powerful goddess Inanna. She was Inanna to the Sumerians and Ishtar to the later Akkadian-speaking civilizations of Babylon and other cities. I've been working with the goddess Inanna since that time in many different ways. In the last 20 years, I've been involved in Queer Pagan Camp, a gathering of queer pagans and friends that's happened nearly every year at different sites, and where I've given workshops related to Inanna, which I will talk about later. This talk I'm giving now is adapted from an article I wrote for a forthcoming book, Walking the Sumerian Path. It brings together much of my experience and unites my passions for queer history and for my goddess Inanna. I'll start by explaining my title, Rainbow over Sumer. In the Sumerian story of Inanna and the gardener Shukalituda, the goddess Inanna, most often seen as the planet Venus, here appears in the daytime. She stretches herself like a rainbow across the sky. She is the rainbow. Now, the rainbow did not, of course, mean to the Sumerians what it's thought to mean by many people today, i.e. the celebration and human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex and asexual people, which we now associate with it, and which I'm going to call LGBTQIA, a long acronym, but not as long as the saying all the words. But it was in the temples of Inanna that we find the predecessors of today's rainbow people, those who showed sexual and or gender diversity. I'd like to read you an extract from the 2001 book, The Invention of the City by Gwendolyn Leake. It refers to Uruk, the city of a great Inanna temple, at its height around 2900 BCE. Now that's almost 5,000 years ago. Uruk in southern Mesopotamia would have been the largest city in the world at that time. It also refers to the later city of Babylon, where the same goddess was also worshipped under her Akkadian name of Ishtar. So here is Gwendolyn Leake. I've taken a little out of this quotation, but the meaning remains unchanged. We still know very little about the realities of urban life in Mesopotamia, but it is worth noting that there existed a positive paradigm of free love that was associated with Inanna Ishtar. In the Hebrew Bible, Babylon is portrayed as a city of licentiousness, but the Mesopotamian poets present Uruk as a city of festivals, its streets full of singing and dancing. Uruk, mother of cities, may have invented bureaucracy and control, but it may also have been the first to develop mentalities and facilities to challenge conventional sexuality, a vital, if not uncontroversial, function of the city down to our own days. Now, I didn't know about this in the early 70s when I was one of the members of the Gay Liberation Front in that modern Babylon, London. I was finally liberated from the secrecy and doubts of my teenage years. With inspiration and boundless enthusiasm, we looked to the past as well as the future, seeking our own history. We claimed as our own the homosexual lovers of Greece, the poems of Sappho. We celebrated David and Jonathan. We wondered if the biblical Ruth and Naomi might have been even closer than anyone knew. What few of us imagined then was the unusually inclusive temples of Inanna in ancient Sumer. There was place there for people who were gender variant and those who were attracted to their own gender. Few of us had probably heard much of Sumer. News trickled out over time, and a friend once told me that Inanna had a soft spot for gay men. She did indeed, and I think for many queer people. This history is still not known by the majority of LGBTQIA people. For many, the knowledge that this marvelously inventive and endlessly creative culture of Sumer had a place for people like us has been both moving and affirming. This is how I see a great part of my spiritual work, to bring that affirmation to the varied LGBTQIA communities. I believe it to be a work to which Inanna has called me. Exciting new information relevant to my theme has emerged in recent studies. Betty de Jong-Meador, in her book Inanna, Lady of Largest Heart, offers a rendering of important Sumerian poems. Now, these poems are thought to be by the high priestess Enheduanna, who was active in the 23rd century BCE. She was a high priestess of the moon god Nanna and his daughter Inanna. Enheduanna tells us about the Sag Shubal, or head overturning ritual. This ritual seems to have been performed when a new temple of Inanna was set up. It's a ritual that Inanna performs herself to initiate cultic attendance. Of course, I assume that in real life, the role of Inanna was taken by the senior priestess representing her. These attendants were religious officiants who we might describe as priests and priestesses, or perhaps they were more like the nuns and monks of a religious community. They would not have been paid wages, but fed, housed, and clothed. To be initiated into Inanna's service through this head-overturning ritual of a new temple meant having one's gender changed. For Inanna was famed as the goddess who had the power to change men into women and women into men. For some of the cultic attendants, we might even, in modern parlance, say they were having their true gender affirmed by the goddess. In the relevant poem, which, like the book itself by Meador, is called Lady of Largest Heart, there is a puzzling, fragmented passage from which Meador has teased a new meaning. Her reading, as you will see, makes it seem likely that gender non-conforming people were attracted to the Inanna temple, even that they arrived there for refuge and were welcomed and given a cultic role. Now, why might Inanna's gender-changing ritual be called head overturning? Like Meador, I think it is because Inanna, with her own androgynous nature, of which we will speak further, with her brilliance and sharp wit, is said to be able to, and this is a quotation, split the door where cleverness resides. We see this as the goddess being able to see into the mind. She is not baffled by a person's apparent gender. She can see the gender that animates them. In my description below, I'm using the words of the translation by Meador, which includes gendered nouns and pronouns. However, in this informal account, it seems more helpful to readers 18 years on from Meador's book to change this and use the pronouns they, their, them. Of course, this is about Sumerian people more than 4,000 years ago. It's not about contemporary gender non-conforming, gender fluid, non-binary or transgender people. We are separated by many complexities of our respective cultural contexts over these thousands of years. Yet contemporary people who resonate with these descriptions may find this head-overturning ritual of the Inanna religion to be of interest to them. And I do think it should be better known by all pagans, ancient historians, and activists on gender and sexuality. So what does the poem in Midor's translation tell us? Inanna, and Hadwana says in Midor's translation, is dressing a young person, one who has been brought up as a woman. This young one is a person with lala, this wonderful expression which sounds rather feminine to our culture, meant to the Sumerians that the person had the handsome bearing, the appealing looks, and the vigour usually ascribed to a young man. The young person has been evilly spurned by people, and they have swayed beneath the wrath thrown on them everywhere. And this is some of the words. Their only path a wanderer in dim and lonely streets, their only rest a narrow spot in the jostling marketplace. Inanna, Enheduanna continues, wants to take this scourge from the young person's burdened flesh, and so she creates a sacred rite. It is a rite to consecrate their heart as male. In token of this, Inanna breaks the silver brooch pin, fastening the young one's robe. This pin was a Sumerian symbol of femininity. She gives the newly gendered one the masculine symbol, which was a mace, and makes them into a pili pili. This was a role in the temple which seems to have been masculine, presumably for those originally considered female who underwent this ritual, or possibly for other masculine people as well. Not all commentators agree that the pili pili might be female-bodied, but it was the view of the very distinguished Swedish Assyriologist Åke Sjöberg, as well as the more recent Betty de Jong-Midor. Let's return to the poem Lady of Largest Heart. Inanna then spreads her lapis lazuli net. The many sacred things in Sumer were made of lapis lazuli. So Inanna has a net made of lapis lazuli, and she spreads it wider, pulling to her a person who has been brought up as a man, who equally needed her help. She breaks their mace and gives the newly gendered one the symbolic brooch that fastens a female robe, making them female, making them a Kogura, the diversely gendered priest, or should I say priestess, who is often found in Inanna's service. She calls these two new acolytes Reed Marsh Woman and Reed Marsh Man. I don't actually know which way round these terms were applied, but I do think this indicates the way that they, like reeds in a marsh, inhabit a liminal space between the conventional genders. It is like the transition between land and water. They enter her service as ecstatic priests and priestesses. They form processions. They enact cultic dramas. Part of their work is to mourn and to sing and wail, to calm the heart of Inanna when she is angry. The role of the Koguras was also to carry weapons and to engage in ritual combat. This enacts the warrior aspect of Inanna, and it's recorded that their weapons were often covered with blood. Translators and commentators before Midor have been unsure or have disagreed about what has been meant by the bal, or change, for the pili pili and Kogura. Some have maintained this means only gender fluidity in dress. Now, there are very many references to cultic personnel cross-dressing. Sometimes they wear female clothes on the left half of the body and male clothes on the right, or sometimes they're cross-dressed. Others are sure that these cultic officiants remain changed by the head overturning ritual. Some have emphasized that it was believed that Inanna truly had the power to turn women into men and men into women, as many hymns assert. We hear about the clothes and hair clasps worn by Koguras, also that Inanna has the power to put a female voice or female speech patterns into them. It is likely that many diverse expressions of gender change, gender recognition, and gender fluidity were to be found over a wide region, for Inanna had temples in many cities and over a great length of time. So what can we gather from this? How did it work sociologically? On the one hand, there is an advantage for the Inanna cult, the extraordinary, beautiful, glamorous, magical, and sometimes perhaps startling appearance of Inanna's temple personnel must have had an impressive effect on watchers of their processions through the cities. Inanna Ishtar turned the maleness of her Kogura followers into femaleness, it is said, in order to bring about religious awe in the people. We can also see from Meadows' translation about the young woman who runs to the temple and is made into a pili that gender non-conforming people seem to have faced exclusion, loneliness, and persecution in Sumer, as they have done in many societies. Yet in the temples of Inanna, they could gain recognition, acceptance of their varied gender, a home, subsistence, work that was valued, and a community, and possibly lovers as well. They were given the opportunity of a spiritual path as an ecstatic priest or priestess, as a cult performer in ritual dramas, and a participant in other ceremonies. As well as these two named roles, there were others. There were opportunities for men as asinu, which seems very similar to a kogura, though it may mean someone who was either asexual or a eunuch, and also as sagur sag, a role that has puzzled commentators. But Gwendolyn Leake argues convincingly that it refers to people who were born intersex. Integration of gender non-conforming people and intersex people into the temples could be positively interpreted as part of a cultural desire to find places for all, a desire which acts reparatively to address discrimination and exclusion. This desire is shown by a myth, that of Enki and Ninmah. Enki, the god of wisdom, was faced with the challenge of finding destinies for people who might at first sight seem difficult to fit into society due to their disability or difference. One of the people he seeks to find a role for was a person with neither penis nor vagina. This is a natural intersex bodily variation, which is rare but does exist. Enki found a destiny for this person in the service of the king, just as he found places for people with various impairments of mobility or senses. We could infer that the god of wisdom took pride in his ingenuity in arranging destiny so that none should be excluded from society. In conversation with a friend who is an intersex activist, Ananaki Ray Marquez, I learned that there would have been a higher incidence of all kinds of intersex people in the ancient Near East. This is not only because intersex people are often hidden today and changed in their appearance by hormone treatments and surgery. It's also because in the modern world, the surgeries that are performed may interfere with fertility in intersex people. Some intersex people have always been fertile, though this has been ignored or denied by many in the medical world. When intersex people have no surgery, the likelihood of their genes being passed on is of course much higher, increasing the population of intersex people. Sumerian culture seems to have made an honoured space not only for that person without genitalia mentioned in the Enki and Nimar story, but for the far more numerous intersex people with other diversely lovely bodies. Gwendolyn Leake described the processions of Inanna at festivals. These included a large contingent of Sag people with their typical hairstyle, colourful ribbons, and what was said to be the physical characteristics of divinity on their bodies. This, Leake believes, shows that intersex people were seen as marked by the gods and may have played a role in Mesopotamian society, somewhat like the Hijra in India, but with more honour and social integration. I assume that they were therefore blessed and auspicious, bringing renown and awe to the temple of Inanna. This is very far from the destiny most intersex people have experienced in recent millennia. Indeed, not only were gender-variant people of all kinds found roles and actively welcomed in the temple communities, but gender-variant beings played a crucial part in one of the most vivid myths that the Sumerians told. In the story of Inanna's descent to the netherworld, two beings, neither female nor male, are created by Enki, the god of wisdom. He makes them in order to save Inanna when she is struck dead in the netherworld. They are able to elude the gatekeeper who guards the door to the netherworld. They slip through it like flies and perform an empathic and much-needed service for its mourning queen, Ereshkigal. They found her mired in grief for her dead husband, isolated, without comfort or companionship. The two beings, the Kugura, who we have seen before, and the Galutur, excelled at empathy and comfort. It has been suggested by some commentators that they were created by Enki simply to trick Ereshkigal, but I believe they performed a needed service for which they had specialized skills. Part of the function of the Kugura in the temples was to mourn and lament. One of their costumes was a mourning garment. It was their loving kindness to dread Ereshkigal that enabled them to claim as reward the corpse of Inanna. They then aroused her from death with the water of life and food of life that they carried. They were crucial actors, and as Inanna's helpers, they must have been beloved. In my own philosophical understanding, which I do not claim to have derived from Sumerian thought, I believe it is their non-binary status that enables them to evade the binary categories. They're able to circumvent divisions of closed or open, the doors to the netherworld, of above and below, and even of the greatest binary we experience, of death and life. So what about lesbian, gay and bisexual people in Sumer? Australian academic Louise Pryke says in her 2017 book Ishtar, while it is perhaps anachronistic to apply the terms homosexual and bisexual in the context of ancient Mesopotamian society, same-sex desire and relations were certainly part of Mesopotamian culture. Yet our limited knowledge of this culture in the ancient Near East creates interpretive problems for assessing the meaning of various forms of sexuality to the Mesopotamians' social and religious experiences. Though the head overturning ritual I have described relates to gender, those who were variant in sexual orientation do seem also to have had a place in the Inanna temple. Though Pryke is rightly cautious about how to interpret descriptions of Sumerian sexual practice and expression, it is clear that the Inanna temples did include that diversity. The positive paradigm of free love associated with Inanna Ishtar that I quoted in Gwendolyn Leake's words offered opportunities for work and community to diverse people, and some were surely very similar to those we call gay and bisexual men, even if their identities were conceptualized somewhat differently. There was a long-standing role for the Gala priests, who are thought to have taken female cultic roles, especially the singing of lamentations, and it does seem that many had homosexual relationships. In his book Female and Male, The Cultic Personnel, Richard A. Henshaw emphasizes that whatever manifestation of human sexuality appeared, people would say this was caused by Inanna, for all sexuality was under her aegis. But what about lesbian and bisexual women? Assyriologists are not agreed. In his detailed description of the roles of those within Sumerian temples of Inanna, Richard Henshaw maintains that officiants undertook practices related to homosexuality, but not to lesbianism. However, Henshaw also tells us that the relevant material discovered is a tiny percentage of the Mesopotamian scribes' total output, and that there are immense gaps in our knowledge. He suspected that the full information about rituals was never given on the tablets that relate to them, and secrets were closely guarded. He thought the texts were intentionally cryptic. Indeed, the worshipper is told in one text not to divulge the teachings of Ishtar. We therefore cannot be sure that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. We can imagine that some we would call lesbian might have been attracted to the temple position of Pili Pili, for instance. There is at least one reference to a female Kugura and to Kuguras, who are usually assumed to be born male, giving birth. Whether this is a dramatic enactment or an occasional reality in a female-bodied Kugura is not known. There were many secrets that Inanna Ishtar did not wish to be divulged. We might also consider the situation of the many priestesses in Inanna temples who did not marry or take on sacred erotic practice that was heterosexual. The temples offered opportunities to those who were unable to have children, to women and men who were asexual, to women who wanted work outside of the usual options for women, outside of work for the family, reproduction, sexual services and domestic services, or commercial activity. Among the temple personnel, there might very well have been lesbian and bisexual women. We may speculate about how the temples of Inanna came to include people representing so many diverse aspects of sexuality and gender. One of the reasons could be the androgyny which was perceived in Inanna herself. Now, it is true that the femininity of her body is hugely celebrated. There is little literature that has so much beauty of language about the vulva of the goddess. But the masculine aspects of the behavior and character of Inanna are also emphasized. This may be because she was a fearsome warrior, and the world of war was perceived as masculine. She is portrayed on occasion as bearded. Women can, of course, have beards, and they may have served Inanna, though record of this has not been found to my knowledge. There is also a reference to Inanna's beard in the astronomical record. The planet Venus is said sometimes to have a beard, a kind of radiance coming down towards the Earth, caused by certain atmospheric conditions. The Moon and other planets are also said to wear a beard at times. Beards of the deities were not necessarily thought of as made of human-style hair. They were often described as having lapis lazuli beards. It may be that the androgynous Ishtar originated from the amalgamation of the Sumerian goddess Inanna with the goddess Ishtar of the later Semitic people who were Akkadian speakers. It has been suggested that the androgynous Ishtar originated from the amalgamation of the Sumerian goddess Inanna with the goddess Ishtar of the later Semitic people who were Akkadian speakers. In Sumer, the sun was male, he was Inanna's brother Utu, and the planet Venus as both morning and evening star was perceived as Inanna. Amongst Semitic people in the ancient Near East, the sun was female, and the planet Venus was seen as male, for instance as Athtar in southern Arabia and as Ashtar in Moab. In Syria, Astarte was seen as both male and female at different times, or even at the same time. And in Mari, in northern Mesopotamia, two different traditions of Ishtar were seen, a female and a male. Many of these different cultures intermingled and influenced each other, particularly when they were adjacent. At some periods and places, the evening star became female as Ishtar and ruled sex and love, and the morning star remained male and ruled war, the bearded Ishtar being described as the male Ishtar. Eventually, in Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians and Semitic people coexisted and synchronized their cultures, the Sumerian mythic model prevailed of a male sun and a female Venus, who was both morning and evening star. We could argue that the masculine side of Ishtar and Inanna is the remnant of Ashtar, a male god. Was this, then, the explanation for the androgyny that is so prominent in Inanna's temples? I am personally convinced that it's certainly not the only reason. Some linguistic analysts of the period have claimed that the words for the unconventionally gendered cultic personnel of the temples are very old. This seemed not to derive from either Sumerian or Semitic languages, but to an even older linguistic strand. This gives the impression that the gender nonconformity in the Inanna Ishtar cult may be a very ancient tradition. Other characters in Inanna's myths also change gender over time or have unusual roles. My own beloved character in her stories is her Sukal, or chief minister, the loyal, resourceful and warrior-like goddess Ninshubur. Ninshubur was a goddess who, like Inanna herself, breaks narrow gender stereotypes. It is she who sails with Inanna through the perilous underground sea, the Absu, in the myth of Inanna's journey to visit the god Enki. It is she who overcomes all the monsters that assail their boat on their return. Over and over she saves the boat for Inanna. In the better-known story of Inanna's journey to the netherworld, it is Ninshubur who goes to god Enki and implores him to help Inanna, who is lost in the great below. Some later texts treat Ninshubur as a male god, rather to my dismay, as this loses her complexity and her gender nonconformity. I prefer readings that allow her ambivalence to remain, such as the translation by William Sladek of Inanna's famous descent to the netherworld. Sladek uses the Western medieval term knight and the masculine term major domo for Ninshubur while treating her as female. When Inanna does not return from the netherworld, Ninshubur's grief and urgency suggests to me something more than the actions of a faithful servant. They speak of a deeper relationship between the two goddesses, one perhaps that was an unrecorded secret of Inanna. This accords with my personal experience of Ninshubur when I have enacted her in ritual. In contemporary pagan practice, lesbian women and genderqueer and non-binary people have all identified with Ninshubur. The Sumerian literature of Inanna emphasizes the Sumerian literature of Inanna emphasizes throughout the huge importance the Sumerians accorded to the experience of desire in many manifestations. This goes some way to explain the nature of the cultic personnel and the role of sexuality and sexual acts in temple practice, and describes one aspect of the goddess. Discussion has in the past focused on fertility as the reason for the inclusion of sexual practices in temples. But fertility does not explain the maintenance of a large staff of homosexual attendants and cultic performers. The celebration of desire as a great good in itself, as a joyous gift, for its magical power, as well as for the fertility it may in some situations initiate, makes far more sense. It was Inanna who symbolized that desire, and when she went to the netherworld, desire itself had fled. The bull no longer jumped upon the cow, nor the ass upon the jenny. Humans, too, were believed to lose all sexual motivation in the goddess's absence. As many of you will know, it is now believed that the Greek cult of Aphrodite owed much to that of Inanna Ishtar, which diffused to Greece through Syria, Turkey, and Cyprus, and contrasted with the fertility cults of goddesses of harvest. In the small amount of Sappho's poetry that has survived, we can see a similar focus on the vivid experience of desire that we find in hymns to Inanna. Desire was the gift of this goddess, whether we call her Aphrodite or Inanna. This focus on desire took place within a culture of joy, where harlots were celebrated for loving kindness and their civilizing influence, and where there was tremendous emphasis on the happiness that sexuality brings to human life. The erotic experience of the woman, modelled by the goddess Inanna, was made paramount. Its description is virtually unparalleled in literature from the ancient world. Unusually, desire is expressed in a female voice. Inanna oversaw desire of all kinds, between long-time spouses and between casual sex partners. Whether the so-called sacred prostitution of women or men in the temples actually existed is unclear. Specialists on this period are not agreed on the subject, and latterly have been sceptical that this occurred. There was certainly cultic sexual practice taking place in the temples, in a specific room, the Eshtam house. It seems to have had cosmic and spiritual significance rather than being for profit, and it involved many kinds of sexual enactments. All public sex workers in street or tavern were under the protection of Inanna, which may have gone some way to reduce any violence and abuse towards them, at least by people who feared divine retribution. While contemporary Western society talks about the prostitute with a heart of gold, as if that was newsworthy and unusual, Sumerian texts praise the loving harimtu, a sex worker from the taverns or street, with no air of surprise. Some maintain Ishtar herself was said to sit at the doorway playing the part of the harimtu. Certainly, as evening star, she looked down on the harimtu and blessed her. It was a harimtu who was sent from the city to tame the wild man Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh. She was successful in her mission, a success that the Sumerians would have applauded and approved. Now, in the section that follows, I'm going to talk of an Inanna myth about sexual abuse. It is a proper courtesy to warn people of this, and you may want to fast forward a short way if you do not want to hear it. It takes just over 4.5 minutes. When we read the stories of the passionate goddess Inanna, it is clear that they emphasize that desire, like gender, is of tremendous variety and it's wholly being divinely given. Yet it should not disrupt the cosmic or the social order. In particular, in the context of a sexually celebratory and diverse society, there are lessons about consent. The stories of Inanna, unusually for a powerful deity, include one where she herself has been disrespected and victimized. This foul act is committed by the failed and destructive gardener, Shukalituda, a man who uproots plants instead of nurturing them. He violates her while she is sleeping deeply under a shady poplar tree after an exhausting tour of the earth and heavens. The sleeping Inanna is wearing over her vulva the loincloth of the Holy May, 7 of the most important spiritual powers of the universe, a cloth which Shukalituda impiously removes. The Sumerians listening to this story would have instantly recognized the particularly horrifying nature of such a violation. This, an uncomfortable and invocative story, anticipates later much better known variants, which tell us of a divinely ordained garden where a foolish mortal makes a fatal mistake. The Shukalituda story of sex without consent may underlie the later story of the eating of a forbidden piece of fruit. Christian culture surrounds with references and iconography that make it seem that the temptation introduced into Eden by the serpent and the eating of the apple represent sexuality itself as the great wrong, the original sin. Yet in this Sumerian version, sexuality is holy, embodied by the goddess Inanna. It is her violation, and by implication surely all sexual acts without consent, that constitute the evil that enters the garden. In this case, a lustful mortal understands quite wrongly the power of sexuality which Inanna represents and rules. The Sumerian tale tells us of a violation of cosmic proportions, the invasion of the body of the very goddess whose gift to mortals is sexual desire itself. This myth goes on to tell of the plagues that were sent by the distressed and enraged Inanna. She is struggling to manage the damage her pain and anger does to her, to gain assistance from the god Enki, and to heal from the experience. The wells and irrigation channels of the land run with blood. She mounts on a cloud, followed by the south wind and a fearsome storm flood, which devastate the land. Her pili and a dust form followed after, and she blocked all the highways of the land. This doesn't stop until the eventual discovery of the offender, who has been hiding in the city. Inanna then stretches herself as a majestic rainbow over the land, arriving to punish him. She comes in power. She pronounces judgment, and Shukalituda was killed. Inanna decrees that his story must always be told. Sadly for us all, his story and the significance of his crime have been lost and forgotten, in vivid contrast to the far better known Garden of Eden story. Whatever more philosophically complex meaning the eating of that forbidden fruit may have had to the original writers and earlier readers of the Garden of Eden story, it has in Christian times been used to incriminate sexual desire itself, not its abuse. Once this Sumerian myth was much better known. Louise Pratt believes that it emphasizes the damage, limitation, and restraints needed in a society that sought to, quotes, harness the prodigious creative power of sexual desire through ritual, ideology, and magic. Not all sexual behavior was condoned by the goddess. Shukalituda elicits no sympathy from Inanna, for his goddess-struck admiration for her famed beauty and allure. The Greeks and Hebrews regarded Mesopotamia as a hotbed of outrageous sexual practice, if not depravity. Yet the development of cities has greatly enabled the building of LGBTQIA communities. These provide refuge as well as social life, access to partners, and political organizing. The city is crucial to those who are often isolated, persecuted, or rejected in their place of origin. In Sumer, the cities and their Inanna temples must have acted like a magnet to sexually diverse and gender-variant people. They were able to add to the religious veneration and renown of the Inanna temples. It was a marriage made in heaven. As well as my being personally devoted to her, Inanna has been important to me as a queer woman because she offers different roles for women. She does not fit easily into the maiden mother crone model of goddesses. In the story of Inanna's descent to the netherworld, her two sons appear when she returns from the depths, Shara and Lulal. Is she then a mother? But in Sumer, local gods are described as the sons and daughters of a powerful deity when they are associated with that deity's cult. In fact, Shara and Lulal are the gods of the cities Umma and Babtibira, which Inanna visits after her triumphant ascent from the great below. They are her spiritual sons. Shara, who is my son who cuts my nails and smooths my hair, sounds very much like one of the Kuguras or Asinus from the temples. After working with and for the Lady of Love and Battle for many years in my own non-Wiccan tradition, I reached a midlife crisis that came around the time of my menopause. I had a breakdown and gave up the work I had been doing. Eventually, I felt that I had passed through this years-long process, and I wanted a ritual to mark my journey back from my own underworld. I decided on a ritual enactment of Inanna's journey, her descent and death, her resurrection and ascent from the netherworld. I was fortunate to have women from my group and my partner to enact and celebrate this with me. I remember clearly being killed by the netherworld queen Ereshkigal and being succored by the Kugura and Galatur. My life then moved into a time of power and happiness in both work and relationships. In my own work with LGBTQIA communities, I go to various summer camps and festivals and have, with my genderqueer colleague Lou Hart, who acted as the Galatur in my menopause ritual, given a workshop for the UK's LGBTQ History Month on the head overturning ritual. I've also given a workshop at London's Sex Workers Open University on Inanna Ishtar's protection of sex workers. One of the popular workshops I've organised at different events enacts the maiden Inanna's early journey to the watery abyss, the Abzu, to visit the wisdom god Enki. There she obtains the May, spiritual powers which symbolize cosmic order and the skills and institutions of civilization. I storytell Inanna's journey and we praise Inanna. The personal work participants do focuses on claiming the power of your own sexuality and your sexual identity, and on identifying skills you wish you could develop, which would become your personal May. Participants at Queer Pagan Camp met trained and experienced pagan priests and priestesses who enacted Inanna, Enki, and their ministers Isimud and Ninshubur in the drama. I have also organised a large enactment of Inanna's descent to the underworld, which was watched by the whole of Queer Pagan Camp. Most recently, I have offered at both this camp and Queer Spirit Festival a workshop called The Queer People of Inanna. I've been very moved because of how much this has meant to many of the people attending. So many of us have felt religions have ignored us or even persecuted us. At Queer Pagan Camp 2017, we made a procession in our specially chosen clothes through the fields in the evening light. In the woods, our destination, I had secretly arranged beforehand for a large, open-sided wooden shelter to be turned into a temple, dressed with Turkish carpets and a throne. I led the procession towards it. In the temple were two genderqueer acolytes and a priestess who had taken on the role and costume and the being of the goddess Inanna. The light was fading, but we could see by the light of two torches that were planted either side of the throne of Inanna. Each person was led up to her, and they whispered words, descriptions of themselves which they wanted blessed, their own naming of their gender or their sexuality or both, a title carefully chosen by them, hard won and made sacred by the struggles, the loneliness, the determination, the triumph behind each name. They were blessed. It was one of the best evenings of my life. And the young 18-year-old from 1965 who lives inside me was blessed as I watched them.